Hi, this is Julie from Prairie Junction Quilt Shop in Cozad, Nebraska. Thanks for joining us. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about adding a hanging sleeve to some of your projects. I know a lot of us like to make these cute little mini quilts, and then we get them finished and we kind of wonder, well, now what do I do with them? So we have some wire hangers that work great for a display. Some people like to use a little dowel rod to hang them on their walls, but you need to have a way to attach them to whatever you're wanting to. So on this little wire hanger, I've attached a little hanging sleeve to the back of the project so that I could slide it onto the wire of the hanger. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to make one of those, as that's something that patterns often don't include. You'll need a strip of fabric, and the strip that I cut really is dependent upon the size of the project that I'm making. This is a very tiny project. I think it's about 10 by 12 inches finished. So my strip is going to be much smaller in comparison to if I was doing a little bit larger projects, or maybe even a 40-inch square wall quilt. So you have to determine the size a little bit in proportion to what you're wanting to hang it on. And this is going on the little wire of a hanger, so it would be very narrow, whereas if I was using a dowel rod, I would need that depth to be a little thicker to accommodate the diameter of the rod. So there's no real magic science to that. For this little project, I've cut strips that are 2.5 inches tall, and then my width is dependent upon the width of my project or the width of the hanger that I'm putting it on. So you have to customize that a little bit. Then the first thing that you'll do is you're going to fold the edges over once and twice on both ends of your hanging strip. So I folded those in, and then I'm going to stitch across that edge to hold those down in place. Now, just so you could see it more easily in my demo, I've stitched in a dark color thread so that it would show up for you, but I would typically use a color of thread that would match my fabric. And in this case, my fabric matched the backing fabric of my wall hanging, but that's really a personal choice and is completely up to you. So after I've hemmed those sides, I'm going to fold this strip in half. So I have this. And then I'm going to top stitch just a real scant 1/4 inch from the raw edge of that strip. And then I fold the strip so that that seam is actually in the center of the tube. And I'm going to press that down. So I'll end up with something like this. And then that lays nice and flat. And that's a good place, even if you have some best press, to give it just a little mist of breast press or starch to get a nice crisp fold. And then I will take this strip and I'll put it on the back side of my wall hanging. And you'll have to adjust a little bit where you want that to hang. I positioned mine just a little ways down from the top so that my wall hanging would stick up a little bit beyond that frame. So that's kind of just a personal preference where you'll want to position that. So I will lay that strip centered on the back of my wall hanging, and I like to stick it down in place so it stays in place while I hand stitch it. And I like to use my Wash Away Wonder Tape by Dritz. It's a double stick tape about 1/4 inch wide that has a paper backing on it. So what I will do is I'll take a little strip of this as I peel it off, and I'm going to stick it to the back side of that strip and clip that off. And then I finger press that down, and then I'm able to peel away the paper backing, and then I'm able to stick that in place on the back of my wall quilt. And I'll just stick it down and give it a quick little finger press. And then I just use thread and hand sewing needle that matches my strip of fabric. And I'll just do a little whip stitch to attach that to the back of my wall quilt. And then you're ready to slide it on your dowel or slide it on your wire hanger. So that's one way that you can go about making a hanging strip, but there are several other ways as well. Sometimes when I make a hanging strip, you'll use the same exact steps that I just went through, where you cut a strip of fabric, fold the raw edges in, stitch the ends down, and then fold that strip in half and top stitch it. But instead of twisting it so that that seam is down the middle, I'm going to leave the seam at the top, and then actually I could catch that in the binding of my wall quilt. So just for example, if I was putting it on the back side of this, obviously the size isn't quite appropriate, but where I stitched that binding down, before I hand tacked my binding, I could catch that raw edge underneath my binding strip, and I could base that down in place. And then when I go to fold my binding back around to hand tack it down, I would just hand tack the binding down on top of that edge of that strip. And then I would hand tack this bottom edge down as well. And then this top raw edge is all encased in your binding. So that's a nice way to do it, especially if you're using a dowel rod where you don't mind having the hanging strip all the way at the top of the quilt. So there's another way that you can attach a hanging sleeve. One more way is, if you're using a dowel, is you can put little triangle pockets in the corner of your quilt. So in this particular case, I've cut a 5-inch square of fabric, and you're going to fold it in half, wrong sides together to make a triangle, and then you would just butt the raw edges of that triangle up to the edges of your quilt before you've attached your binding, and you would base that down in place, and then you'll just catch that as you attach your binding, and then cover it up when you hand tack your binding on the back side, and then that makes a little hanging pocket. So there's another way you can do a hanging sleeve. And on my wool projects, this little mat would fit on this size hanger as well. I'll just cut an extra scrap of wool from the background fabric. That's probably about 1.5 inches tall. And I've just I machine stitched that to my backing fabric before I ever assembled my project. But you could also come back and hand tack that onto your backing fabric as well. And that's just a little strip of wool. And since wool doesn't fray, it's really not necessary to finish those edges. So those are 4 different ways that you can go about attaching a hanging sleeve. And then I'd like to tell you a little bit about these projects. They're from a company called Red Button Quilt Company, and she makes tons of these darling little projects. They're great for instant gratification. A lot of them can be done with scraps. They're nice small projects. And she's well known for including some little buttons for embellishments in her projects. And her signature is all of her patterns have a little red spool button in them, or some type of little red button, and that goes with her namesake of Red Button Quilt Company. So we carry a ton of her designs. The designer's Red Button Quilt Company, and a lot of the patterns, like I said, include tiny little buttons that are really fun for embellishment, and they're quick and easy. We have kits for several of those items from some of the samples that we have done up here, but we think you'll really enjoy those. And you can find them on our website at prairiepointjunction.com. And if you search by designer, you can just search for Red Button Quilt Co. and you'll be able to find those all on our site. A lot of them include a little bit of piecing with just a touch of maybe wool applique or embroidery. So they're a fun way to combine a lot of different types of projects. This little one here is called October Nights, and it's got darling little bat buttons that go with it. This little Happy Halloween project. We have kits for both of these items, and I think the little Halloween buttons, the little jack-o'-lanterns, are just adorable, and a cute little spider web embroidery up in the corner. This project here is called Autumn Pinwheels, and it comes with a little flower pot and some little flowers. And then these 2 projects, they all come on one pattern together, and they're called Seasons 2. And once again, just a tiny bit of piecing with some wool applique. So they're fun, quick, and easy projects. And now that you know how to put a hanging sleeve on the back of them, you'll be ready to use them to decorate your home. So thanks for joining us today. Once again, this is Julie at Prairie Point Junction at Cozad, Nebraska. And you can find the products that I've shown you at prairiepointjunction.com. Thanks so much.